Well, here's our last chapter in fire prevention for using our textbook, Fire Prevention Applications for the Company Officer. It's wildland risk management. So we're going to look at the wildland-urban interface and the components of that, the historical significance of what's going on in the environment around us, especially here in western U.S. with global warming or whatever you feel is the reason why we've had extended drought. There's no doubt that there's a change in weather patterns. Whether we're causing it or not, that's for politicians to argue about. We're going to look at the risk to structures and man-made environment. We're going to look at public awareness and our need for more public discussion and interaction as fire prevention inspectors. We need to be able to go out in our communities and educate them of the effects of wildfire on communities, the factors that contribute to wildfires, the factors that can be modified to make the wildfire situation at least more manageable with less loss. So we want to help them identify prevention strategies in the wildland-urban interface and how we can do fuel typing and proper engineering of the homes that are in the what we call wildland-urban interface. Basically, we want to educate the public. So wildland fires are increasing at an alarming rate. We've had in California 2 of the worst fires in written California history. Recently, the fire up in Paradise, California, and then the Thomas fire in Ventura. Lots of homes lost, lots of loss of life, especially in Paradise. Breaking all the records. There's no doubt that we are at greater risk. So the emergency responses, even with the whole state responding, has not been enough. So we can't combat these large wildfires, especially under Santa Ana wind conditions, on top of drought conditions. So we need to do our part before the event to make the situation better. So, there's a lot of people and a lot of debate about we're out of ecological fire balance because we've been fighting fires aggressively since 1910. That's a history story I don't have time to tell you, but back in 1910 we had a big, huge set of fires that kind of created the public policy of we fight every fire when it's small and we'll do everything we can to keep it from getting bigger. Well, now we have fires that are growing larger and moving faster in very dead fuels, and they occur in every country, but the United States and Australia seem to be 2 of the worst. And some of the Mediterranean countries like Spain and Portugal and countries that have a similar environment to what we have here in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. Thousands of homes are being destroyed every year as more and more communities break into the wildland-urban interface. So, as I mentioned, policy changed in 1910. Some people say we've kind of interrupted nature's fire cycle of burning the fires when we have lower fuels, not so thick. So now we have forest overgrowth. We have just enormous BTUs being put out by our fires because of the amount of fuel load. So there's things that are being done to respond to this, more controlled fires, more clearance, but because of some of this, we've got detrimental drought and insects like the bark beetle that are causing millions and millions of ponderosa pines to die throughout the state of California. So all of these factors go into contributing to wildfire. If you've taken my wildland class, fuel, weather, and topography. Climate, topography, geography, vegetation, animal life, pollution, all of these things are contributing to the spread of wildfire. So on fire prevention, every firefighter should know something about fire prevention. We need to know why it's important. We need to be able to discuss with the public how we can better combat wildland fire through prevention. And we need to talk with them and educate them as to what it takes to make a structure safe. Every firefighter, not just the fire inspectors, but every firefighter should know how to conduct an inspection. I worked in a wildland fire interface most of my career, so it was one of the first things I learned as soon as I got out here to Santa Clarita. But every firefighter should know these basic facts we're going to talk about today, even if you never spend a day in the fire prevention office. And we also need to be aware when we are on wildland fires, how to protect the area of the origin of fire for the fire investigators, because that's part of fire prevention too. So the three major components to a fire prevention plan are education, engineering, and enforcement. This is essential that we use all three parts of fire prevention when we're working with the wildland. So when we consider wildland fire prevention, we want to consider the risks, and that's the people things, the human-related activities which can cause fires to start, and we also need to consider the hazards. And the hazards are the flammable materials in which the fire starts, those homes and the environment around us that are going to be the hazards. So, as more homes are encroaching into the wildland-urban interface, that's what we call it, the WUI, the wildland-urban interface, WUI. The watershed is become a problem. It's not just homes that are burning. But why do we fight fires that are out in the middle of nowhere? Well, because it's taking away our watershed. Wildland fires, when they destroy our environment around us, they destroy the ability of the plants and trees to slow drainage from rainfall, thus less water gets into our aquifers. So also the water that does get into our reservoirs can be tainted by the carbon and the soot and the crud that's left behind by fires. And of course there's environmental and economic loss from our wildland fires. So there's a couple of definitions you just need to understand. If you take my wildland class, wildland firefighting, we talk more in detail about this. But just so that you know, there's basically four kinds of wildland urban interface. Classic interface is where we have tract homes that impede into the wildland areas. And most of you taking this class live in Southern California, so you know what I'm talking about, where tract homes just keep growing up the mountains and into the brush, and especially those homes on the perimeters of those tracts are at great risk. The intermix is where we have homes that are spotted throughout the wildland, and I always mention Malibu because most people can picture Malibu. We've got all of these mansions. They're very widespread. They're all over the hillsides, and they're here, there, and everywhere intermixed into the wildlands. So that's why we lose more homes in places like Malibu and Calabasas and these other more wealthy communities. Another example, though, of intermix is where we have cabins in places like Big Bear and the Sequoia National Forest, Hume Lake, where I go a lot, where we spot these cabins and they're surrounded by brush. They're mixed in. Occluded is where we have wildland that it's actually the island. It's an island surrounded by urban growth. And I think for anybody who lives in the greater LA area, they can picture Griffith Park is a great example of that. You've got this wildland area with civilization all around it. And lastly, typical rural farm and ranch land like in Ventura County and San Bernardino. Orange County still has some. LA County barely has any left because of the urban growth. There's a lot of barriers to getting the word out on this. The public, I think they're perceiving the risk more now than they have in the past, but a lot of people just think it won't happen to them. And, you know, what kind of a property owner moves out into the wildland and urban interface, especially the intermix and the rural areas? Well, they want that more rugged lifestyle. They want a cabin that's covered in wood. They want a more independent lifestyle, and a lot of them don't like to be told what to do. So they have that it won't happen here, and if something happens, the fire department will save us. All of these attitudes are not good. We don't want to cut down our trees and brush because they're so pretty and they're beautiful. We hate the clear cutting. And then, of course, there's that I can do whatever I want to do. You know, a lot of people that live out in these cabin and desert communities like Lake LA or the Green Valley, Lake Hughes, and some of that. They want to get away from civilization, and they have the kind of mentality where they're maybe kind of like in a compound. So, you know, the methamphetamines makers and the government haters, they don't want to be told what to do, and they're going to resist us. So we got to get out there and do our best. So we got to also remember, wildfires don't just destroy buildings and our urban lifestyle. They attack historical artifacts. I have a picture here of Bodie, California, but there's all sorts of historical artifacts that get destroyed by wildland fires. And of course, just basic vegetation and the watershed that I mentioned earlier. And, you know, Bambi and Thumper. We don't want to ruin their home. We want them to live out there. So let's protect all of them. So the key is these 3 E's that I already mentioned. Education is the key to cultural change. Every effort should be made through social media, traditional media, like this pamphlet. The picture you see here is the Ready, Set, Go pamphlet that LA County Fire produces and puts out. It's an expensive brochure. It's colored, it's multi-paged, it's an attempt to get the word out. So our constant interaction with the public, giving brochures like this, having a presence on the internet, but our going out there and talking to them also is a great way that we can educate the public. We do engineering. When a home is being built in the wildland urban interface, we want to design it in such a way, and you can see here a photograph of a home with composition roofs, stucco walls, and we've also encouraged them in the kind of fuels that they would have around their home. So you see a lot of cactus, a lot of rock landscaping, and plants that are higher in water content and aren't as prone to becoming a source where the fire gets into it, and then from it gets into the home. Examples of bad trees around your home are junipers, pines, especially eucalyptus. These kinds of plants and trees, they spread fire into the home. So we discourage them and encourage other types of plants and proper spacing. Lastly, we need to get out there and, as a fire crew, enforce these laws. Enforcement is our last-ditch effort in wildland fire prevention. We want to educate and engineer first, but we got to go out there and make sure that they maintain it. So every year, we need to do brush abatement. And some fire departments are more vigilant about this than others, but we need to make it a priority. Fines should be levied for noncompliance. In LA County, hey, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Do you mind? Oh, that's good. I needed that. Okay, so in LA County, we have a program where the local fire station goes out and inspects, like in the photograph you see here on our presentation. If they see that they're not compliant, they write them a need to abate, need to improve. They come back to see if it was done. If it's not done, they don't write them another report. They turn them in to the brush abatement department. And once they're turned into the brush abatement department, the wheels start rolling, and the wheels roll in a way they don't want it to roll. Because what the brush abatement department will do, they will check one more time, and if it is not done, they will send out a hand crew who will do it for them. And then they will put the price of sending that hand crew, which, by the way, is way more expensive than you would have spent if you hired some young kid or some day laborer to come out and do it for you. It's thousands of dollars. They will be charged on their taxes for having to clear their brush for them. Yeah, it's a great program. It works and it motivates people. Once they get hit with that once, they'll never violate it again. So it's an essential that we get out there and do the enforcement. But first, educate and engineer. Enforcement should be our last-ditch effort. So how are we going to do this? Well, the key is changing human behavior. We got to work with people. We got to educate them. We got to engineer the homes, and we've got to prosecute the offenders. Law enforcement is the last element of prevention. Use it when everything else fails. So as I mentioned before, fuel, weather, and topography are the behavior factors that drive wildland fire. The only one we can have an effect on is fuel. We can't change the weather. We can slightly change the topography, but really, for the most part, we can't. So we have a program called Firewise. And Firewise is the concept of designing, constructing, modifying, and maintaining homes in such a way that it's less vulnerable to fire that may threaten it. Another term that you need to know is what we're trying to create is defensible space and defendable homes. So defensible space is that cleared area between the structure and wildland vegetation. So here we have an example. This home has no defensible space. Now, granted, we're only getting one image and one side of it, but look at the pine needles on top of that house. Look at how high the grass is. The grass is as high as the eaves. It's right up against the house. How about, do you want to go up that man-made ladder that leads up to the roof? Yeah, this home is going to be lost. It is not defendable. Now, on the other hand, this home can be saved. And in a wildland fire, if you look, you look closely, you can see black burned grass soot on the ground around this home. And they saved this home. And the reason is it had good defensible space. Now, I think it's a little thick for me. I would want a little bit more trimming and spacing of some of the brush, but they did okay. So what are some of the design elements? Well, it's not this. You don't have to do like this image of a metal-clad house on concrete. You don't have to have the ugliest house in town to be fire safe. You don't have to do that. There's so many modern materials, composition roofs, tile roofs, stucco, boxing in your eaves, and good fuel modification we can do to make the home safe. So 4 primary ways that fires destroy homes is, number 1, through the roof covering. It's against the law to have wood shingles in California anymore in any area that's near the wildland-urban interface. Slowly but surely, when people have re-roofed their homes, they've not been allowed to put wood shake. Siding materials, though, is a problem. And, you know, when you have a cabin out in the mountains, you want wood siding. But it's better to use stucco and non-flammable materials. Decks is a big problem as well. The fire gets under the decks and spreads into the home. And lastly, ornamental shrubbery that's near the home, like I mentioned, junipers or other hedges that are right up against the home, they catch on fire. The fire gets into the eaves, goes into the attic, and the house burns from the attic down. So what are we going to do to change that? Well, we're going to create defensible space. It's critical to the survivability of the home. We're going to modify the fuel locations and the concentration of it. We don't have to denude the environment. It doesn't have to be down to the stubble. It just needs to be spread out. So here's a great picture, an example of a home with wood siding and a deck. And is this defensible space? Take a second. Look at it. Do you see the grass under the deck? Do you see that this deck is old, very dry wood, very high grasses, and a bunch of stuff stored under the deck that would easily catch fire and spread this fire into the home? This home is not defensible as it is. How about this ranch? This is up in Santa Barbara. You can see the ocean in the background. So this is a moisture environment, which is good. All our trees are really green. There's grass. There is some good spacing, but again, so many trees, so much brush. Maybe we could clear them around the buildings a little bit better. I know they want to provide shade for the horses on this horse ranch, so we don't want to cut everything down, but maybe some of it. Thin it out. Now here's a great example of defensible space. This is a home in the Acton area, I believe, or Canyon Country. And you can see that the house does have a lot of trees around it. We want to make sure that all the branches are 10 feet away from the house, but there is no brush right up to the home. There's good clearance. It's in the lower part. It's not on top of a hillside, which kind of helps. They've got a pool nearby where they could pump from. And they've got decent, adequate access. If we could get in here before the fire, we might park a couple of fire engines here. I guarantee you this home is going to be there after the fire goes by. So our strategies are trim or interrupt ladder fuels. Use Class A roofing materials, tile or comp. We want to harden the structure by boxing in eaves and using stucco or other non-flammable materials. We need to make sure there's metal screens on the exterior vents. We need to vent our attics, but we need to make sure that they're nice, tight screens that aren't going to allow embers in. We want double pane glazing on our windows, good wood metal treatments, window treatments that aren't going to allow the fire in, and then we're going to manage the vegetation and provide good fire access. So here's a drawing from the Ready, Set, Go brochure that LA County provides. Notice there's still trees and plants and brush and grass, but around the home in that 30 feet zone, the yard zone, we're going to have as few trees, and the trees need to be 10 feet away from chimneys, and I prefer 10 feet away from the roof. Excuse me. And then down low grass, some plants and brush, but spaced out. 100 foot, we're going to allow more plants, but again, proper spacing. The big stand of pine trees, quite a few of them together in that foreground. Sometimes we call that a stringer of trees, as long as it doesn't get too close, but that's going to put off a lot of BTUs if that gets burning. So we want to make sure there aren't good ladder fuels, those fuels that go from grass to brush to tree and allow the fire to grow up into the bigger part of trees. So if they're on a hillside, that 100-foot screen zone, on the hillside portion, on the downhill portion, we might even increase it to 200 feet. So if it's on a steep slope or in a chimney, it's going to be hit harder and the heat all goes up. So we'll go 100 to 200 feet, and that is at the discretion of the inspector. We want to make sure that there's good access. We're going to look at the roads. Are they properly marked? Are there address numbers? If the home is set in from the road on a long driveway, we want an address number out at the road, not just on their home. We need roads that are wide enough and bridges that are strong enough to handle fire apparatus. If the bridges are homemade, we probably won't drive in and help them. And that is the case in some of the older homes here in Santa Clarita. They have bridges that they made themselves when they built the homes back in the 40s or 50s and the rules weren't as strict. Well, they might be able to drive their car over that, but we can't drive a 50,000-pound fire engine over it. So we want to make sure that the bridges are adequate. I've driven on in a water tender on some bridges that were really sketchy, and you know what? I wouldn't do it again. We also want to make sure in those rural areas, if they don't have fire hydrants, that they have tanks, cisterns, and access to the water. In the homes, we even want to make sure, do you have smoke detectors? Are you changing your batteries? Do you have fire extinguishers? Do you have a residential fire sprinkler system? So when we go out to do an inspection, we want to make sure that we've got our proper tools. So first of all, you want to have a map of the area. If you can get a map, and most fire departments have these, that show property lines, that's even better. Because sometimes at one house, the neighbor has to clear to protect the house next door. So we need to make sure whose responsibility is it. You want to take your inspection forms, but nowadays in this modern age, most people are using tablets or computers to enter the information, but tablets is becoming more and more common. Inspection forms are still out there, though, and are useful. You want to make sure if you're using inspection forms that you have pens and pencils and all of that kind of stuff, and a proper clipboard. Measuring tape, you want something about 100 feet or more. I had a big measuring tape. If you can get one of those ones that rolls, that's even better. A lot of times they're going to say, well, what do you mean 100 feet? Where's 100 feet? Well, show them where 100 feet is. You might want to have a flashlight for looking under buildings. I don't crawl under buildings. That's not my job, but I might look under decks or whatever, and I can make suggestions to them. There are some things we can't make them do. I'll talk about decks a little bit later on. But that we might suggest that they do, like boxing in eaves and boxing in decks. Cameras. You might want to have a camera, but don't use your personal phone, because if you end up in court, they're going to confiscate your phone. So use something provided to you by the fire department you work for, or a separate camera. My son-in-law, who works for LA City Fire Department, bought a tablet that he uses, that's his own, that he uses for photographs, and if it got confiscated, it's okay. That's what he bought it for. He only uses it at work. I used to always carry a shovel. When I was a patrolman, I went out doing inspections on my own. I'm not going to say that I had it just in case I met up against some crazy person, but that might have been in the back of my mind. No, I used it for dogs and snakes is what I'd admit to. I did get attacked by a dog once, and my shovel saved me. I didn't whack the dog, but I put it between me and the dog, and I got aggressive with the dog, and I caused it to back off. But if you encounter a rattlesnake out there while you're digging around in the brush, you'll be thankful that you've got a shovel with you. So I always carried a shovel. I told people I just had it just in case I encountered a snake, or I used it for, like a cane or to support myself on steep hillsides and stuff like that. But I always carried a shovel. And lastly, you might want to have in your vehicle, or at least access to, copies of the laws and regulations of your jurisdiction. When you're conducting an inspection, remember, your mission is to gain their willing cooperation and compliance. Education and compliance is the goal. So take the time. Help them understand. Don't be the kind of person that comes by and says, you got to change all this, shove a form in their hand, and walk off. Educate them. I used to spend time explaining things to people, talking with them. They'd invite me into the house, say, "Hey, come and have a cup of coffee." Nope, I'm not here to socialize, but I got a job to do, but I do want to make sure you understand everything. Be a public service servant, okay? Remember, that's your job. Get out there and educate and explain how to be Firewise. So you want to remember that these elements are, we want adequate clearance. That 30 feet, pretty much not a lot. 100 feet, proper spacing. 200 feet if we're on a hillside. We want to make sure there's no litter on the roof, no branches against the roof, especially near the chimney, no leaves in the rain gutters. I put screens over my rain gutters just for that reason. Well-maintained screens over the chimney, that's a little harder to inspect. You might have to go on a roof. On newer homes, they're probably going to have them. But I had a friend whose house burned down because they had a fire in the fireplace, and something floated out of the chimney, landed on their wood shake roof, and it burned to the ground. No trees or limbs within 10 feet of the chimney, and as I said before, I don't like 10 feet from the whole house. Screens on those attic vents. And you can suggest, you can't make them, but you can suggest to them that they box in their eaves. It's a really smart thing to do. So any firewood that's piled, it needs to be 25 feet from the structure, not against it. I know we want to have it where we can get it real easily when it's raining, but it needs to be away from the house. Clearly marked street name and house number, we want to make sure that that's done. If they do have burn barrels, they need to be properly maintained with screens and 10 feet of clearance. But in LA County, we don't allow burns without a burn permit, and it's got to comply with the EPA. So there's not very much burning that's allowed by the public in LA County. It just doesn't happen that much anymore. It used to in the old days. Ventura County does allow ag burns, and they do allow for proper burn permits. San Bernardino and some other counties do, but LA County doesn't happen much. And if you have a propane tank, it's got to have 5 feet of clearance around it of brush and grass, and it needs to be 20 feet away from all structures. So, what I want you to do for this final project is, hopefully you already did this, download a copy of LA County's Wildland Fire Inspection form. They called it 410B. And we're going to look at 4 pictures, and this is the first one. We're going to pretend it's all on the same property, but it's not. These are 4 different properties. So what do you think? Would you write this person up? Take a look at it. Maybe pause this video and take a second and look at it and see what you think. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion here. I think this is pretty darn good. Comp roof, stucco siding, concrete right around the house. This is just a shed or some kind of a he shed, she shed, or something like that. But it's hard to tell with our perspective how close that tree is in the background, as long as it's not too close, and the brush that's around it has some distance. Maybe it could be a little thinner, but for the most part, this is something I'd say, hey, good job. Just maintain this. Be careful. I might encourage them to box in their eaves if they choose to and thin out a little bit of the brush. But other than that, good job. What do you think here? Whoa, pause it, get out, sharpen your pencil, and write a whole bunch of stuff. What kind of violations do you see here at this cabin type home? Well, here's my opinion. Let's start with the propane tank. No clearance. Got to have 5 feet minimum around the propane tank. Yeah, it's 20 feet from the house. But under these conditions, I would, because it's a hillside, because of the kind of brush here, I would even encourage them. The law says 5 feet. I would do 20 feet. 20 feet of clearance around this propane tank. You do not want fire impacting it. That's just going to be a big problem. Hey, how about that wood pile right against the house to the middle left? Can you see that there? Got to get that wood pile away from the home. Cover it with tarps if you want to keep it dry, but do not have it right against the house. So we got to get 30 foot of clearance and then maybe 100 all around, thinning trees and brush. But how about that deck and hillside? One of the things I encourage people with decks is to box them in. By doing it, it's expensive, but by boxing that in, they can create, you can sell them on, this can be storage by creating an enclosed area under your deck. You can turn it into storage or maybe even make it another part of the home. So, I encourage people to do it. I can't make them, but I can make them clear everything under that deck. And because of the deck, this is a home, you can tell that this is on a slope. I would make them clear and thin up to 200 feet. It's probably going to take a while. We'll attack this 1 year at a time. Let's get the stuff that's close, then let's increase it and thin as time goes on until we can get better clearance. Now here's something on the opposite end. I'm looking at this thinking, this is pretty good. Could I make it a little better? Well, let's look at the house on the left. Maybe they could box in under their deck. That would really help because there is brush under that deck and flammable materials. They either got to clear all the flammable materials or clear the brush, or better yet, box it in, create some storage area for your kayaks and all of your, outdoorsy kind of toys, and make a safer home. Some of that brush on the right-hand side of the house and on the left-hand side is too close for comfort, in my opinion. I want to thin some of that out. And maybe that big, long string of brush that goes from the bottom right all the way up to that house, let's clear some of it so it's not a continuous ladder right to the house. Let's look at the houses on the right. Again, same thing. Maybe some little bit of clearance here and there, just some thinning. This is really not horrible. And then it's hard to tell, but that is a mid-slope road in between the house on the left and the one in the middle. And that leads to the driveways of all three of these homes. So I'd want to make sure that the access is adequate. Can we get our fire engines up there before the fire to help them out? If it isn't, they might want to clear some around their roads, up to 10 feet off of the road. There are homes, and I've done it with, captains in tow, but there have been homes in our districts where we've told them, we cannot come and help you, and it's not because we don't want to. We can't get access. Your home is too hard to get to because of your road. Okay, this one is a global mega fail, right? This is worst case scenario. I believe that this is in Old Topanga Canyon. I would tell this person your home is indefensible. It's going to burn down if a fire comes up this canyon. If we're going to start working on how can we make this home fire safe. Well, first of all, we got to clear some of these trees that are right up against the house. We got to clear the brush. We got to thin out the area. They're going to fight it because they like it this way. That's why they moved here. But we've got to make some improvements. Lots of wood siding on this house. A deck that is sure to catch fire. I'd say the only good thing about this house is part of it has what looks to be comp or painted siding, and it has a comp roof. That's about it. Everything else, I would just start checking boxes. And again, when something is this bad, you might want to take a plan that works on it over time with this family. Okay, resident. Hey, great job. Make sure you copy the wildland form, scan it into your computer, upload it, and get the 10 points for doing this. Okay, we're almost done. Have a great day.